I've lived in Alaska for about 6 years now. I moved up here from outside of Seattle to get away from the noise and the people. I have a small place about 45 minutes north of Fairbanks, just off the Steese Highway. It's not totally off the grid. I have power and a decent internet connection, but it's remote enough that I don't see my neighbors unless I'm driving into town to get supplies. At the large grocery store with the tan brick exterior near the highway. Last week, we got hit with a pretty heavy blizzard. It wasn't anything unusual for this time of year, but it was enough to keep me inside for 2 days straight. The wind was hitting the north side of the cabin pretty hard, and the snow was piling up against the door. I spent most of my time keeping the wood stove going and catching up on some work. My cabin is a simple rectangular build with dark cedar siding and a slanted metal roof. There's a small porch on the front and a gravel driveway that leads out to a dirt road, which eventually connects to the main highway. The storm finally died down on Thursday morning. The sky was that clear, bright blue, you only get after a big dump of snow. Around 10 a.m., I put on my parka and my boots to go out and start shoveling. I needed to clear a path to the shed where I keep the generator and make sure the exhaust for the heater wasn't blocked. The snow was fresh and powdery, maybe 2 feet deep in the drifts. I started at the front door. As I was clearing the porch, I noticed something in the snow, about 5 feet away from the stairs. They were footprints. At first, I didn't think much of it. I figured maybe a neighbor had come by during the storm to check on me, though that didn't make much sense given how bad the visibility was. I stepped off the porch to get a closer look. They were definitely boot prints. They looked like they were made by a standard work boot, maybe a size 10 or 11. The tread was clear, a heavy, lugged pattern. What struck me as odd was how fresh they were. They weren't filled in with snow at all, which meant they had to have been made after the wind stopped blowing, probably within the last hour or two. I looked toward my driveway, expecting to see a trail leading back to the road. There was nothing. The snow in my driveway was a smooth, unbroken sheet of white. I looked toward the woods behind the cabin, where the spruce trees get thick. No tracks there either. I stood there for a second, just leaning on my shovel, trying to figure out where the person had come from. I decided to follow the tracks to see where they went. They didn't go to the road, and they didn't go to the woods. They went around the side of the cabin. I walked alongside them, being careful not to step on them. The tracks stayed about 4 feet away from the cabin walls. They were spaced out in a normal walking gait, not running, not tiptoeing, just a steady, heavy walk. I followed them around the back of the house, past the kitchen window and the woodpile. They continued around the other side, past the small window in the bathroom, and then right back to the front porch where I had first seen them. They made a perfect circle around my house. I felt a little bit of a knot in my stomach, but I tried to stay logical about it. I figured maybe I had missed the entry trail. I did another lap, looking further out into the yard. I walked all the way to the edge of my property, near the small general store with the rusted gas pump out front that's been closed for years. The snow out there was waist deep and completely undisturbed. There were no snowmobile tracks, no snowshoe prints, and definitely no boot prints. I went back to the cabin and looked at the start of the tracks again. They just started, right there in the middle of the yard, about 5 feet from the porch. One moment there was nothing, and the next there was a clear, heavy impression of a left boot. I followed the circle again, more slowly this time. I counted the laps. The prints went around the cabin exactly 4 times. On the 4th lap, the tracks just stopped. They ended right next to where they began. There was a final right boot print, and then nothing but smooth, deep snow for 30 yards in every direction. I spent about an hour walking around my entire perimeter. I checked the roof of the cabin, thinking maybe someone had jumped off. But the snow on the metal roof was thick and had that perfect, rounded edge that happens when it hasn't been touched. There were no marks in the snow on the roof, and no signs of anything sliding down the sides. I even checked the trees. The nearest birch tree is about 15 feet from where the tracks started. There's no way someone could have jumped that far and landed without leaving a massive crater in the powder. These prints were clean. They looked like someone had just been lowered from a crane, walked in a circle, and then been lifted straight back up. I went back inside and locked the door. I don't usually lock my door during the day, but I felt a bit uneasy. I sat by the window that looks out over the backyard and just watched. I didn't see anything. No movement, no birds, just the sun hitting the snow. Around 2 p.m., I decided to go back out and measure the prints. I took a yardstick from the utility closet. The prints were 11.5 inches long. The depth was about 4 inches into the fresh powder. I weighed myself and then stepped into the snow nearby to compare. My prints were slightly deeper, which suggested whoever made those tracks was probably lighter than me, maybe 160 or 170 pounds. I stayed up late that night. I kept the lights off and sat in the dark, looking out the windows. I live near the road that leads toward the large white satellite dishes used for space research, so occasionally I'll see a truck go by, but it was a quiet night. I didn't hear anything except the usual creaking of the cabin as the temperature dropped. The next morning, I went out again. No new tracks. The old ones were still there, though they had started to lose their sharp edges as the sun hit them. I called a guy I know who lives about 5 miles down the road, near the 2-story hotel with the cracked concrete parking lot. I asked him if he'd seen anyone out walking, or if he'd had any weird visitors. He said he hadn't seen a soul since before the storm. He laughed and asked if I was getting cabin fever. I told him I probably was and hung up. I've been thinking about it for 3 days now. I've gone over every possibility in my head. I thought maybe it was a prank, but I don't know who would trek out here in waist-deep snow just to walk in a circle and somehow hide their entry and exit tracks. It's physically impossible to move through that much snow without leaving a trail. I even thought about the possibility of a large bird, but the prints were definitely boots. You could see the Vibram-style logo on the heel. I'm still out here, and nothing else has happened. I haven't seen any figures in the woods, and no more prints have appeared. Honestly, I'm starting to think there's a rational explanation that I'm just not seeing, because I'm looking at it from the ground. Maybe it was some kind of weird atmospheric phenomenon. I've heard that sometimes wind can create snow rollers that look like tracks, but these were too consistent and shaped exactly like boots. Or more likely, maybe the tracks were actually from before the storm started. It's possible the wind blew the snow in such a specific way that it filled in the entry and exit trails, but somehow scoured the snow out of the tracks that were closer to the cabin's walls, making them look fresh. The circle might have just been the path I took a few days ago to check the perimeter before the snow got heavy, and the blizzard just played tricks with how the snow settled around the building. It sounds a bit unlikely given how clean the prints were, but it's a lot more grounded than anything else I can come up with. I'm probably just overthinking a weird weather quirk. At least that's what I'm telling myself so I can get some sleep tonight. Regardless, I'm keeping the shovel by the door and the curtains closed for now.